Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crime Family. I'm your co host, AJ, here with a very special episode of the show. So, our brand new season is still a little bit further down the road, but during the hiatus, Katie, Lisa, and I got the opportunity to speak with a very special guest. And we wanted to make sure that as soon as possible after that conversation took place, that we were able to get the episode out for you all. So, that's why we're releasing this episode during our hiatus. But our faithful listeners of the show will remember that back in May, we covered the case of Marion Barter. So Marion Barter was an Australian woman who resigned from her job as a teacher, sold her home, and took off on a year-long solo trip around Europe back in June of 1997. Tragically, after she left for this trip, her family, her friends never saw her again, and she's still considered a missing person. No one's been brought to justice for this case. And there is really a lot to the case. There's a lot of details, there's a lot of twists and turns in this case. And about a week after our episode dropped, Marion's daughter, Sally Leydon, actually reached out to us, and she was very interested in coming on to the show to talk with us and just answer some of our questions. Because if you remember from our episode, we did have just some questions about the timeline and questions about, the case in general. And so she wanted to come on and talk to us to answer those questions, maybe clear up some assumptions that were made and just kind of set the record straight. And we were more than happy to have her come on the show and talk about that. So Sally came on and we had a really great discussion about the case all the way from, events that took place before Marion left in June of 97, kind of, and taking us through this journey of her 30-year fight for justice and for answers in this case about what happened to her mom. So we were very happy to have her on the show, and we hope that you enjoy our interview with Sally Leydon. So thank you so much to Sally for joining us today and taking some time to talk with us. We really appreciate you coming on and talking with us about your mom's case and some of the the latest developments and everything too. So we do really appreciate that. So before we kind of jump into the case, the specifics of the case, I did want to start with one of the latest updates, which was the $1 million reward that actually got announced. And I think that was about a week after our episode dropped. They had announced that. So our listeners might not be aware of that development. So can you just kind of tell us a little bit about that day when that news came out, how you were feeling? And did you know there was going to be some type of announcement like that coming?
Yeah, so I had been pushing for the reward to be upped because there is power in that a lot of the time, and that has proven to be the case, which I'll explain in a second. But my mum's inquest finished in February of 2024, and I just felt like I was stranded. I was on an island. Everyone just said, "See you later. Your mum's dead. Go and get a death certificate. Good luck." And the gentleman that I know you guys have identified and spoken about being Rick Blum. He is just turned 87, actually. So my lawyers had said to me, who's too old, they won't, they won't even bother trying to do any investigation on it because of his age. And I just had to then go and do my own things, which we went overseas and we did a huge amount of work and created a new podcast to tell everybody what we found over there. But through that journey, I was really pushing. I had a petition going to see if the New South Wales Police would up Mum's reward. So we had a reward announced for $250,000 at the beginning of the inquest, around that 2022 mark, and that was the first time ever since she'd been missing. So she'd been missing at that 22-year mark at that point. And then after the inquiry, during the inquiry, they decided to up it to $500,000. And we didn't get any bites, didn't get any information, no leads coming through. And for some weird reason, that $1 million, price tag seems to spark people's awareness, and they do come forward. So on the 4th of May this year, I flew down to Sydney. I live in Brisbane in Queensland. So it's a flight for me to get down there. And there's a really big radio personality down in Sydney who does a lot of political stuff and a lot of, really high-end, get into the nitty-gritty, named Ben Fordham. And I contacted Ben and I said, look, can I come down and would you have me on your radio? Because I'd like your listeners to hear that there is going to be the reward. So I jumped down and saw him at 7 a.m. in the morning in studio, and then headed out to Parramatta, which is west of Sydney, and that's where our police headquarters is for New South Wales. And I met with the police minister there and the head of homicide, and we did a press conference, which you would have all seen. I saw your YouTube clip where you had played a snippet of that. So that was that event happening in Parramatta. And we announced the reward. And from that, my mum's Facebook page had a 4,000% increase that week after we were plugging it. And every media outlet was obviously running that story. And what comes with that is a lot of new people who might not have even known that my mum was a missing person. And in my case, because my mum wasn't even missing to the police, they believed that she'd chosen to leave. There was no real sense of urgency. There was no media or anything until I decided to do a podcast, and that's how we sort of imploded into everyone finding out about my mum. So we were very, very behind the eight ball. But since the reward, I've had probably 6 really, really, really solid leads that have come in, and I know that the police from New South Wales have come up to a certain location and they are looking at things and interviewing people right now as we speak.
Wow. Wow. So that's really, yeah, it seems to be, we're really hopeful that that will lead to something. And the fact that there's actually movement in that, and then the New South Wales police they're currently interviewing, that's a good sign for sure.
Yeah,
So
and look, it gives people a bit of hope as well. I think to know that this is 29-year-old case, and we've got people who are coming forward going, "Wow, I just saw your mum's missing persons poster flash up on my Facebook page. I don't know your story. I've never followed you. Haven't listened to the Lady Vanishes podcast or the Missing Matter podcast, but I know something." And other people have said to me, until they were made aware of the situation and the fact that my mum is a missing person and connections to that, people came to me saying, "Wow, I just went and watched the Spotlight show that Channel 7 did, and I saw things on there." And this one lady said to me, it's a case of you don't know what you don't know. And I went, that's actually very true. So knowing that there could be connections to other things that she knows about but didn't actually understand what that connected to, that's where this consistent plugging on Facebook and social media and getting the word out there, that's what helps in these cases.
yeah, definitely. And actually, your mom's case wasn't even one I was aware of until we chose to do it. I was just looking at cases, and this one came up, and I watched and listened to the podcast and stuff. So yeah, even until recently, I wasn't even aware. So
yeah, I do have a lot of people following from Canada. Actually, we did some live shows a couple of years back, and we were sort of putting it out there as to where we might go and do these live shows. And I had quite a few people from Canada going, "Can you come to Canada? We want to see you over here." And they're not live shows for, personality or any, hullabaloo. It was actually to raise money for us to be able to go and do this research trip that we had to do, which was a 3.5-week trip through Europe and Japan and the UK, trying to backtrack and see where we could go and dig a bit deeper and talk to people. Because the reality is the police don't have the resources to do that sort of thing. You might be shocked to know that New South Wales police only have 36 homicide team members working in homicide for the whole of New South Wales. New South Wales is massive. It's a massive state. They have the largest number of missing persons cases. They've got 750 unsolved cases sitting on their books dating back to the 1970s. And so, when I found that out recently through a parliamentary inquiry, I was shocked to the core. And I thought, you know what, I shouldn't be shocked because we don't hear from them. We don't get good communication a lot of the time. And there's no wonder we don't, because there's not enough of them trying to. I mean, how can they go and solve the 750 that are sitting there needing help, and then all of the other cases that are flowing through on the daily? Like last year in Australia, we had just shy of 50,000 people reported missing in the country. So, for every missing person that goes missing, they've got to do a report, they've got to speak to family, they've got to put out yellow alerts, they've got to do their research, they've got to take statements. And even if those people are found within 24 hours, 48 hours, there's still police officers that are taken away from their job of looking for other people who are genuinely missing, to actually find those people. And most of them are teenagers, and we're trying to, I have come up with a suggestion of doing a missing persons register. So if for people who intentionally want to go missing and don't want anyone to know where they are, but they need to register so that police don't use resources unnecessarily to go and find them, but mark them as safe and well, make sure that they are okay and that they know where they are. So when their family or friends ring police to say, hey, where is my missing person? It's not impacting on the police resources that they don't even already have. And there'd be sort of like an umbrella where people would contact, a bit like Crime Stoppers here in Australia, where there's a 1300 number that people can ring, and they can check if their person has registered as missing. And there's consequences, right? If it's like wearing your seatbelt, if you don't wear it, you get a fine. And to save people just thinking, and particularly aiming it at teenagers again, if they just think, oh, I can just not tell my parents I'm going to go away, the stress and the ambiguity that leaves with their parents, even just for 48 hours, is huge stress and huge expense to the taxpayer who's paying for these services from the police. So that's something I've presented to our parliamentary inquiry that we've just recently had, and I'm hoping that there's a lot of legs to that, but we're hoping that maybe that might be taken seriously and it could help in the future, just by way of knowing where more people are than having 50,000 people not knowing where they are.
When we might have covered this, but it's like, when did the police go from we think she just is left on her own to, okay, maybe this is a missing persons case? Like, when did that kind of flip for them?
Yeah, I think the penny dropped when we started doing the podcast. So we launched the podcast on the 1st of April 2019. And within 6 weeks, we had a listener of that podcast who went on to Trove and thought that there was something with the name change. Like, why has she changed her name to this random name of Florabella Ramakerl? If you're going to go missing, you're going to be Jane Smith. You're not going to be Florabella Ramakerl. Turned out there was only 2 Ramakerls in the whole of Australia, one being my mum, one being a Lonely Hearts ad from a newspaper article that this lady found. So she did a few tricks, that lady being Joni, and Joni was going to jump on with us this morning, but unfortunately she's got a family emergency. But she put like little spaces in between the name Ramakerl when she was doing these searches, because we obviously had jumped on and done searches ourselves but couldn't find anything. And she happened to find a Lonely Hearts ad in a French-speaking newspaper. It was a guy called M.F. Ramakerl. We worked out and established that the M stands for Monsieur. So it was F. Ramakerl, and we had his age in 1993 when this ad was placed. And then we also had an address, which was a PO box in Lennox Heads, which is on the north coast of New South Wales. And then we had a phone number. And so what jumped out to us was that there was no other Ramakerls in Australia other than this ad in the paper and my mum changing her name, which she did legally. Okay, so she did that through the Supreme Court. It was all done legitimately. She didn't do it off market or anything like that. So it was very traceable. Just the police didn't find it for 13 years. So we can talk about that later. From there, we gave the police the ad. They sort of scoffed it off and said, oh, they think it could be this guy Ramakerl, is what they've written in the police file. And Channel 7 and myself and the podcast team and Joni, we actually went for a search to see if we could find an F. Ramakerl. The key point with the Lennox Heads is my mum's money was coming out of a bank account in Byron Bay, and Lennox Heads and Byron Bay are only suburbs apart. So it was quite alarming for us that we've got a Ramakerl with an address in Lennox Heads and a phone number. The police told us that they couldn't identify who owned the phone number at the time of the ad, because Telstra, who is our telco over here, didn't provide records going that far back. So I had another listener of the podcast who went down to the local library in Ballina, and he hand scanned over 6,000 entries and was able to identify the phone number in the ad to a business. And at the same time, the ad was being placed, and the business owner was identified through an ABN search. And at that point, we were able to identify that it was Frederick de Hevedary, who owned a company, Ballina Coin Invest, which was a coin dealing business in Ballina. Again, Ballina is next to Lennox Heads and Byron Bay, so it's all in that little pocket down in the north coast of New South Wales. And it sort of started the ball rolling. We went overseas. We found an F. Ramakerl who was living in Luxembourg. that was alarming as well, because my mum actually had Luxembourg on her outgoing passenger card as to where she was going to go and live. And so we went there, we knocked on his door. He was extremely, I don't know, he gave off a very bad vibe, let's say, and everybody who was following us along was like, oh my gosh, what does he know? Turns out that his identity was actually stolen. And the gentleman that we've spoken about, Rick Blum, he alleges that it didn't happen. Well, he says it doesn't happen, but his partner, Monique Cornelius, said that they had an affair. And Monique Cornelius is the real Fernand Ramakerl's ex-wife. So it's a very hard, convoluted story. That's why we've done a podcast, because we've had to sort of break it down for everybody. But so from that moment, they pretty much at that moment, I got a phone call from the OIC, who's the officer in charge of my mum's case, and he said, I'm going to ask for fresh eyes to be looked over the case. And this was in July of 2019. So we'd only launched the podcast 3 months earlier. And at that point, it was handed over to the homicide team in New South Wales. And as of around November of that year, the homicide squad took over. They created a new strike force called Geronga, and it sort of took off from there. I wrote to the coroner, the New South Wales coroner, and asked that they hold a coronial inquest into my mum's disappearance. And that was sort of like, for me all along, I just wanted that to happen because no one had ever investigated my mum's case, and I knew that there was things to find. And so we got there. It took 3 years to go through the inquiry, but it took all of that time for police to step up and go, oh, actually Marion is missing. And it was at the 22-year mark of her being, well, actually 23 years of her disappearance. I had to do a petition for this also and have her put onto the National Missing Persons Register, because she still wasn't even on that. And the problem that I had with that was that if she had died over in Western Australia, those two states don't talk to each other and there's no correlation. So if they found a body and they haven't got my DNA on file because she's not a registered person as missing, there's no way for those people to identify who that body is or who that person is. So we finally got there in the end, and it was a big push, but I'm really grateful to everybody who helped me in the community, because we wouldn't have got there unless that had all happened. So
Wow. Yeah, it's been a long journey for you in those 29 years, right?
yeah.
So I do now kind of jumping back to kind of where it all began, like in June of 97, and just wanted to talk a little bit about, so like the days and weeks leading up to when your mom left for the trip. So she resigned from her position at the school as a teacher, and she had sold her home, I believe, quite quickly, right? Within 3 weeks, she had sold it. And she leaves on June 22nd of 97 for this trip. But there were a couple of things that I've heard you talk about in other podcasts, as well as things that were a little bit odd. Like you did have, like you saw her at a McDonald's. You and Chris, your husband Chris, had saw her at McDonald's, and that was kind of an odd encounter. And then there was also mention of one time when your husband was helping her pack up her house, she had kind of like rushed him out of the house one of those particular days, which was a little bit odd. So can you just talk a little bit about kind of those days and weeks leading up to when she left for that trip and those certain instances specifically?
Yeah, sure. So she actually sold the house for a loss. She sold it $15,000 less than she bought it for. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot in today's money, but back in 1997, that was a pretty big chunk of money. And I did find that was quite odd that she had done that. But she had told us that she was going to downsize when she came back. She was going to buy a unit at Main Beach on the Gold Coast here. And that was sort of all made sense to me. I was like, of course, you don't need a big 3-bedroom house with a swimming pool. If you're a single woman, that's perfectly fine. So she put all her things into storage, into a shipping container. And she'd said to me, if I decide to stay overseas and teach, I'll let you know where the shipping container is and I'll get you to send it over for me. And so I felt, even if I look back at that, I think that was quite telling that she wasn't wanting to disappear. If she was going to stay overseas, she would have just got me to send the shipping container over and I would have sent it over for her as per the agreement. But what you were talking about with Chris, my husband, and mum kicking him out of the house and the McDonald's, that's the same night. So I was at TAFE, which is an educational facility here, where I was actually studying criminology to get into the police force, ironically. And Mum had asked me if I could come and help her pack up the house, and I said, look, I've got TAFE tonight, but I'll ask if Chris could come. So Chris went over and he was packing up boxes, and then he was going to pick me up on the way home, which was just literally around the corner from Mum's place. And so he came and picked me up, and he said, your mum was rude to me tonight. And I was like, my mum's never rude, like that's so weird. And he said that she kicked him out. And I thought that was very odd. That was odd behaviour. My mum would not do that normally, but apparently she said to him, what's the time? And he told her the time, and she said, okay, well, I need you to go, just drop what you're doing. And he said, I'll just keep packing this box, Marion, because he was putting records into a box from the TV cabinet. And she said, no, just leave it. I need you to go. So he just got in the car and left and came round and waited for me. And on the way home, there's a McDonald's that's attached to a service station. And because it was late, Chris and I ducked in there to grab something to eat. And we were sitting inside the restaurant when Chris saw my mum's car pull up at the petrol Bowser to get petrol. And so he sort of goes, oh, look, there's your mum. And I turned around and I'm waving at her, and she's just looking at me like she'd seen a ghost. And she stood at the door of her car like she was going to get petrol, but then got back in the car, didn't get petrol, and drove around the back. So if she'd come past me, I would have seen the person who was sitting in the passenger seat because it was all glass, but that she went round the back and ended up going through the drive-through. And so I ran over to the window and I sort of said, busted, because I saw her. Like my 24-year-old self just thinking that was funny. I'm like, oh, she's got a new boyfriend. Like, she's not telling me about that. So crazy. And so I said to her the next day, who was the guy in the car? And she said, oh, just a guy I met at the art centre, which is just around the corner from her house, where they have plays and movies and things like that, and art shows, and I should add antique shows. And she said, I met him there, and he was just taking me out to say goodbye before I go overseas. And I just left it. I thought, I don't have the right to inquire into my mum's or pry into mum's relationships. I was satisfied with that. I wish I'd pushed a bit harder, but the gentleman in the car was very, very tall, is what I remember, because his head was almost touching the roof. But it was very dark, and as you can appreciate, when you're in a petrol station, gas station variety, you've got the lights sort of reflecting on the windscreen, and you can't really see in very clearly. But he looked dark to me, and he was tall, so that's what I told the police, and they were always like, oh, we'd really like to know who was in the car with her. And I said, well, I would like to know that too. So we've got Rick Blum again. He has said that he has travelled with in my mum's car, but he doesn't have any recollection of that event.
Wow. And was that evening that both of those events happened, was that just a couple of days before she left, or was it a longer period of time?
It was a couple of weeks, because when she ended up packing up the house, she had a timeline where she had a gap in between. So being that the house was such a quick transition, she ended up putting her things into storage, as I mentioned, and she went and stayed with a friend. Her friend is Leslie. And Leslie is one of her girlfriends. When she first moved to the Gold Coast, she was her neighbour. And so they'd stayed friends. And because Leslie lived close to school where Mum was teaching, she decided that she would just stay with her for 3 weeks prior to her actually getting on the bus. And Leslie was the last person to see Mum. She was the one who took her to the bus stop and put her on the bus that took her up to Brisbane International Airport on the 22nd of June when she flew out.
So as you said, so she flies out from Brisbane International Airport on the 22nd of June, and she is in regular contact with you in the first few weeks that she's away, correct? Through postcards and letters. So you are hearing from her quite regularly, and you do get a phone call from her on August 1st, which would have been about 6 weeks or so after she had left, and that, as it turns out, was the last time you spoke with your mum. So can you tell us a little bit about that phone call in particular? Was there anything odd in retrospect during that call, or?
Yeah, look, as you said, we received postcards and letters. She sent postcards and letters to nearly everyone. Not letters, sorry. She sent a letter to me, but she sent postcards to everyone. And she was talking about the strawberries and that, was her Australian accent. My mum was very proper, and she said to me, "Oh, I can't believe that people can recognise that I'm an Aussie. Do I really sound that bad?" And little funny things like that. But she was telling us about squirrels and strawberries and how she was looking forward to going on the Orient Express, and she seemed very relaxed and very calm. But in the letter, there was a different tone. And the letter is important because it's actually written on notepaper from a hotel in Japan called Hotel Nikko Narita. And the envelope is also from the same hotel. And why is that important? Because when I'll keep jumping back to Rick Blom because the story is so hard to sort of tell you all in one session. So he admitted on the stand that he flew to Japan 5 days before my mum did, and he stayed at Hotel Nikko Narita in Japan. So that's the link that I'm going to just put out there now. But my mum's written to me on this notepaper. Thankfully, I kept it and I still have it today. And it was like a bit of a checklist for me. She was making sure that everyone was okay, that I had done all the jobs that she'd left for me, because remembering she did finish up in a bit of a hurry and it was a bit of a flurry. And I don't think the holiday was a long planned thing. I think it was very short planned. We've since found out that she only redid her will in the November of 1996. So within 6 months, she's selling that house that she just put in the will and, going overseas on a holiday and talking about going and living overseas. So I think that in that last 6 months, there was a lot going on as well. But so in the letter, there was lots of checklists for me to do things. And then in that phone call, she was sort of just checking off that what she had sent to me in the letter, because obviously I couldn't write back to her. So she was just wanting to make sure that I'd taken a couple of things back to school and that I'd dropped things off at friends and I'd thanked people for helping her before she left and things like that. She had told me that she was going to stop writing to me and to everybody because it was very time consuming for her to be keeping up with that and having a bit of a break. But she was looking forward to eventually going on the Orient Express, but she told me that she was going to postpone that and that she would do it later, which I thought was a bit weird, but sort of thought, okay, well, she's obviously having a really good time in the UK and she's just moved it back a little bit. I had no idea she was with anybody. So, that sort of stood out to me. But at the time, as a 24-year-old, I didn't really take it too much. And she just said, look, I'll be in touch with you soon. And, when we wind back to 1997, we had no internet, we had no mobile phones. So I was really reliant on her, as was anybody who was traveling, to get a postcard or a letter to say that they were okay. Unfortunately, she didn't tell me where she was going exactly and hotels that she was staying at. So that's become a big part of my life now, that my kids aren't allowed to go anywhere without sort of just letting me know where they're staying and what they're doing if they are traveling. But that comes with the stress of it all, I think, of not knowing where someone is once they leave you. And we sort of hung up the phone. The phone call was a bit weird. She was at a payphone and the money kept dropping out. So instead of her putting more money in to keep the call going, the phone would actually disconnect and then she'd ring me back. And we just had the Thredbo disaster over here, which was a landslide down at one of our ski fields. And my husband and I had actually been down there skiing. So she was ringing and saying, oh, I just got word over here that there had been a disaster in Thredbo. Just wanted to check you and Chris were okay. And so that was the tone of the conversation. And then she said to me, look, I'm going to let you talk now. So this is all the money I've got. This is about the third time the phone's cut off, and she's rung me back. And she said, I'm just going to let you talk now. And I just bought my wedding dress. So I was excited to tell her about that. And I was chatting away and the phone literally just cut out. And that was the last time I ever spoke to her. That was the 1st of August, 1997.
And then because she had kind of told you that she wasn't going to be writing as often or anything like that, and then kind of going forward to October, which was kind of when you first had reported that something was wrong, right? Because she didn't call for your brother's birthday in October, but because she had told you that she wasn't going to be writing as often, you didn't have necessarily reason before that, or maybe were you concerned in those couple of months in between as well?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you go public and you do something like this, and everyone's like, "Oh, well, you didn't do anything. You weren't looking." And I was like, "Well, she had sort of planted the seed to me that we wouldn't be hearing from her for a little while, and I was okay with that. I was like, "Yep, you're a grown woman. You can go and have your holiday. That's fine. Just tap in when you can." And but I started to get worried. Probably, I would say about 3 or 4 weeks after I hadn't heard from her, and it was just a case of, "Gosh, I actually don't know where she is. I actually don't know where she is in the world. I don't know how to contact her." And that was starting to worry me a little bit. But I was also very busy in that space. I just got engaged and we were planning our wedding. And, so I had a lot going on. We just built a house. So we were busy in the garden. And I was just getting on with life. I was just being, I thought, she'll reach out to me when she can. But I just knew come October that she would contact Owen for his birthday. And I was like, that's when we'll definitely hear from her for that. And when that didn't happen, I had a sinking feeling in my gut, and I just knew something was wrong. And that had then chipped over quite, like, I don't know, what is that? Probably about 6 weeks, maybe even 8 weeks since I last spoke to her, that we finally had that moment where we thought we would hear from her. So just to clarify, as you said, Owen's birthday was on the 18th of October. That was a Saturday in 1997. And I rang him and said, "Have you heard from Mum?" And he said no. And then I rang him the next day, so on the Sunday, and I said, "Did you hear from her? Because they're a day behind, like you guys." And I was like, maybe she got her dates mixed up. And he said, "No, I didn't hear from her." And I had a friend over for dinner. My husband and I sat there at the dinner table. We were just discussing it. And I was like, I just don't know where she is. I don't know how to find out if she's okay. Like, I'm worried now. Like, it's been too long. And she actually said to me, "Why don't you ring the bank and see if you can find out if she's using her account?" And I had her bank account details because she'd left her car with me, and I was supposed to put the money from the sale of the car into her bank account, so that I had that information. So I rang the bank and I said to the lady, "Hi, my mum's traveling overseas by herself. She's 51, and she's missed my brother's birthday, and that's really out of character. Could you just check if she's using her account okay?" And she said, "Oh, sorry, I can't tell you anything due to privacy." And then she paused and she said, "Hang on, did you say your mum's overseas?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "Oh my God, there's money coming out of her bank account in Byron Bay." And my heart just sank. Oh, I was like, what? And so she started telling me $5,000 had been coming out of her bank account every day for 3.5 weeks approximately. And 3 days in the middle were back up on the Gold Coast at Burleigh Heads, and then back down in Byron Bay. And so obviously the next day, Chris and I got a photo of Mum and went straight to Byron Bay to try and work out what is going on. And that was the day that we went to the police and started the ball rolling.
You had said in an interview I watched, I Catch Killers, that you did with Gary Jublin. You had said language is so important when you go into report a missing person. I was just wondering if you could, for our listeners, maybe just elaborate a little bit on what you meant by that.
Yeah, sure. When I went to the police, I walked in and said something's wrong. Like, my mum's supposed to be overseas, and I've just found out that money's coming out of her bank account in Byron Bay. And what happened moving forward to the inquest, I was sort of accused by New South Wales police barrister that it was my fault that the police didn't action my mum's disappearance the way they should have, because I didn't walk in and say she was a missing person. That I didn't walk in and say my mum is missing. I said I have concerns for her safety. There's something wrong. Money's just coming out of her bank account here in Byron Bay when she's supposed to be overseas. And I haven't heard from her, and she missed my brother's birthday, and that is out of character. So they were the words that I'd used. And interestingly, the police marked my mum as an occurrence only, which is equal to someone stealing your bike. And they wrote on her file that then not to list this person as missing until they're reported missing in the true sense of the word, and due to other work priorities is why they weren't working on it, is what they wrote.
Wow. And it's kind of shocking too, because back at that time, like, yeah, I don't even know if missing would have been a word that you would have used. Like, you were saying something, you haven't heard from her, something is wrong, but the word missing might not have been top of mind. Like, you were just explaining how you felt, which was something was wrong, right?
And like, I'm not someone that jumps to conclusions either. Like, I'm quite a rational person in my thought process. So I'm not going to run in and go, my mum's missing. I was just like, something's wrong. I need you guys to help me because she shouldn't be here in Byron Bay. Why is money coming out of her bank account? And then they said, oh, but you didn't think she was missing. You just thought that someone had stolen her bank account details. And I said, well, that's what my husband was saying it could be a possibility, which it could have been. But I was like, no, something's wrong. She wouldn't have missed Owen's birthday. And if I fast forward to the end of the inquiry, the coroner actually deemed that my mum died on or around the 15th of October. And I think this is important now that we've got this narrative to talk about, because she didn't ring him, but the coroner said she died 3 days before his birthday. So if you think about that for a minute. So the reason that the 15th of October is important, and that's the date that's on her death certificate, is because on that day, $80,000 was electronically transferred out of my mum's bank account to an unknown bank account. The police went as far as identifying that the 80,000 had transferred out of her account, but they didn't actually go and get her statements. They didn't work out where the money went, and the case was quashed, and they marked her as an occurrence only in that 24-hour period, and they did no further investigation. I didn't know about any of this until 2018, when I did a Freedom of Information request and asked, and I actually did the request in 2017. It took them a year to give me the file, and it was heavily redacted when I got it. But in the first paragraph, there is all this information about the $80,000 and about them saying, oh, well, she's a 51-year-old woman who has been divorced 3 times. She's capable of this behavior, is what they wrote on her file. So yeah, it's been quite traumatizing. To add to that, my brother Owen, whose birthday it was, he had just he'd sort of just had a rekindling with mum as well. He had a troubling childhood with my stepfather and things like that, so he ended up going and living with my dad, and their relationship was strained at times, but they had built up a really beautiful reconnection, and he was really happy about that before she went away. And so after I go to the police down in Byron Bay, I got a phone call from a man approximately 10 days after I had been to the police, and they said to me that we've located your mother and she doesn't want anyone knowing where she is or what she's doing. And my brother ended up taking his own life at the age of 27, and that's why your words matter, right? So what you were asking before, Lisa, in so many elements in my mum's case, your words do matter. So the police need to listen as well. They need to not make assumptions. And I think that's a really big thing that I bang on about all the time as well, because they literally made an assumption that she'd been married 3 times and divorced. And so that was a reason for her to just go off and disappear herself from the universe. What they didn't look at is how vulnerable my mum might have been and how desperate she was to feel loved and be in love. And I don't think that's a crime. But, there's been no chat or talk about coercion or gaslighting or someone being manipulated or conned. None of that conversation has entered the narrative. And unfortunately, the guy that we had as a person of significant interest at our inquest, Rick Blum, he is a convicted con man. So he's been in prison twice in Europe for these exact things. So it's a troubling situation to be in, and I'm still sitting here 29 years later. I don't know where she is.
And one of the main questions I had too, or just the thing that baffles me, is the fact that the police they knew that the 80,000 had been transferred out to an account, but didn't get her statements or didn't get like where it went on the other end. Do you think that would be the natural progression of the investigation? Like, we know the money went out. Where did it go? And like any attempt to find where it went, because obviously that would be a lot of information there too. So I don't even understand like the thought process of why they wouldn't even go down that road.
Yeah, well, the coroner actually did say that the fact that they didn't investigate properly at that juncture was the main reason why my mum was still missing today. And I firmly believe that if we knew where the money went, we would know who or where and what has happened to her. During the inquiry, obviously there's a lot of documents that come through with something like that, and I was going through it with a fine-tooth comb. And there was actually a letter from the Commonwealth Bank, which is the same bank that we're talking about, in a header, and it was actually a document from Rick Blum, who was handing it over to the coroner's court. I don't know why he gave that document to the court. I've got no idea, but it did have his address on it. So I'm potentially thinking maybe he had to give an ID of where he was living at that time. I'm not sure. But anyway, I was reading through it and I noticed the date at the top of the page, and it was the 14th of October. So the day before the $80,000 was transferred out of my mum's bank account. And he went into the Commonwealth Bank and he opened a bank security envelope the day before the 80,000 was transferred out of my mum's account, and he closed that 13 days later. And I rang the homicide team and I said, hey, did you guys see this? And they said, no, we didn't see that. And I was like, well, that's important. I think we need to look at this a little bit more. So there's been a lot of that as well. But I'm the most passionate person in my mum's story. I'm the one who's doing the hard reading and the looking at every single small detail to try and work out what's happened. I don't think the police have the time, and sometimes they don't have the care really to want to do those deep dives. And I say that genuinely. It's not a hate against them, but they don't probably have enough care to actually look at the finer details to try and work out what's happening. I'm sure there are some that do, but in my case, that was not the case.
Yeah, and even like the call that you got 10 days after saying that she had been found. I mean, obviously, according to the coroner, that she had died on the 15th. So obviously that was not true, that she had been found and didn't want. So I just, the whole police part of this is just baffling to me too, of why they, but like you said, I guess they don't have the resources or the time, or they're not as passionate about it, but it's just wild to me.
And I hate using that because I think that's an excuse for them that they don't have it. I think the Australian government really needs to step up and actually put more staff in and train more people and pay them more money and give them more leave, because so often too you ring someone and they're on leave because they're being stressed and things like that. So when you've only got 36 to start with, and then you take out annual leave and sick leave and whatnot, it becomes very thin spread over, as I said, 750 cases that are cold cases, and you've got all these families, and they say that, there's 12 people that are directly affected by having a missing person. And, if you're looking at those sorts of numbers, even just on the numbers on 50,000 last year, it's like 600,000 people are affected by having a missing loved one, and the trauma and the stress that brings to families. And I would say, and we talk about this a fair bit, we think it's way more than 12 people are affected, because they're just calculating the direct family impact. But you're not talking about kids at school, work colleagues, your doctors, your neighbours, people who know you, who care about you as well. The numbers are huge when it comes to the impact that a missing person has on a community and family alike.
One other thing I was going to mention as well, or ask about, was just because there was also a letter from 2011, right, that also had said that she had been located and that the case had been suspended, and that was from 2011. So that they weren't referencing. Were they referencing that previous time when they said that she had been located, or they said that she had been located again in 2011?
Yeah. So what happened in 2011, that was a big year for the case. We had a new OIC on the case. He's the one that passed it over to homicide, saying that he wanted fresh eyes to have a look at it. Fast forward. And in 2011, he rang my husband actually the week before my birthday. So my birthday always falls on the same week as Mother's Day. And he said, look, I've got some information about Marion, but I want to come and tell Sally in person. And Chris said, well, could you just wait another week, because it is Mother's Day and her birthday, and it's always a bit of a rough week for me. I didn't cope very well on those weeks. It's just a bit hard to sort of know how to celebrate and how to process your birthdays and Mother's Day when you don't have your mum around. And so he came up on the following week on a Sunday, and he came to our house. And at that point, he actually put a piece of paper down on the deck we had a table and chairs on our deck, and he put it down and he said, look, can I use your bathroom? And we said yes. And he said, well, if you were to look here on this piece of paper, you might find something of interest. And that was actually at that point where we saw the name Florabella Ramakel for the first time. And so he leaves, and I might just add for quality assurance, he actually says that never happened. He told the court that he did not do this, but I'd like to understand how I knew about the name change outside of the police telling me. But anyway, he claims he didn't do this. But moving forward, we were able to then at the end of that year, there was a conversation that he was having unbeknownst to me to the missing persons unit in Sydney. And he asked them to remove my mum from being on the missing persons register. So when I said before that she hadn't been on the register until I did the podcast in 2019, this was just the New South Wales Missing Persons Register. So he took over the case in 2009, and in 2007, it was Mum's 10th anniversary, and I contacted the AFP here and I said, we need to do something. And at that point, she was actually put onto the New South Wales Missing Persons Register. But in 2011, so it was only, 5 years, this is when this was happening. And so he made a decision and spoke with the Missing Persons Unit saying that they'd found out about the name change, and they claimed that because my mum sold her house, quit her job, and changed her name and didn't tell the family that she was changing her name, that she was deliberately trying to disappear herself, and that she was not a missing person in the true sense of the word. So they went about doing a document, and they removed my mum from the missing persons register once again. Or at that point, that was the first time she'd been removed. And they marked her as located, and they actually even wrote down a date of the day they located her. And then fast forward to 2016, I had a lady following my page, and she said, I've just gone onto the missing persons register and your mum's not on there. And I went, what do you mean she's not on there? So I rang the AFP back, who's the contact that I had made connections with there, and she looked at her file and she said, hang on a minute, there's something on the file, but I just need to get the okay before I can tell you what's on it. So she went and got approval and then sent it to me, and then this document says that Marion was located in the December of 2011, and that her missing person status had been removed, that she was not missing. And so I rang the detective and I said, I've just seen this piece of paper, and I read it out to him, and he said, can you read it to me again? So I read it again, and he said, I'm just going to make a call and I'll ring you back. So he rings me back and he said, I've just spoken to them. They said that's a typo. And I went, okay, all right, well, that's a pretty big typo in a missing persons case. But anyway, he goes, look, I'm just going to do a bit more work on it and I'll call you back. And he did do that. And he's a good guy. Like, I've always said that he was a good guy, right? And he rang me back and we had a big, long conversation. And he said, they've explained to me that there's only two boxes when you've got a missing persons case. You're either missing or you're found. And because we believe that your mum deliberately is missing and chose to leave, we have to mark her as located. And I was so shocked, and I was like, well, okay, so you don't have a box for that one that you're just making assumptions about. You've had no proof that she's alive and well, but we're going to mark her as located and close the case. And essentially that's what happened. And so that was 2016. I then plugged away for a couple of years after that, saying to him and coming up with ideas. Like, I'm like, why am I coming up with all these ideas can we get the incoming and outgoing passenger lists and see if there's the same name on each flight? Maybe we can connect her with somebody on a plane, or can we check if her superannuation has been touched, which is what we have in Australia. The government sort of takes a scrape of your wages and they put it into a saving fund for your retirement. I was like, can you see if she's accessed her super, because she would have been of age by that point to be able to access her super. And I was like, well, if she's going into the bank and taking $5,000 every day out of the bank, clearly money is something that she's interested in, she would go and claim that. Anyway, he said her superannuation was untouched, and there were still no alarms with any of this. So it wasn't until I met Alison in late 2018, and we talked about doing a one program show, kind of like 60 Minutes on Channel 7. And I brought my big folder with me with all my information, and it was at that point, I don't know if you've heard about The Teacher's Pet that's here in Australia. It's really a massive podcast that's come out of Australia about another missing person called Lynette Dawson. And Hedley Thomas did that podcast, and he's one of the top journalists here in Australia. Look him up because there's some really great podcasts that he has done as well. And The Teacher's Pet is massive over here, and did get a conviction from his podcast. So we were just it's been a really hard ride. We're just plugging along and doing what we can. And it's interesting, once you start doing the media, I knew that if I could do something like a podcast, that it would give us an opportunity to step out the story better for people, because there's so much information. And I apologize with these interviews because there is a lot of detail, but stepping them out, I think the Lady Vanishes, we've got like 78 episodes now, including our conversations. And then at the end of the Lady Vanishes, I ended up doing a new podcast called The Missing Matter, which then steps through what I had to go through after the inquest. We sort of do an hour and a half wrap up of what's happened so far, for anyone that hasn't listened. And then we go through going overseas and trying to find more answers when the police had sort of wrapped it up and said, this is it. She died, and there's nothing else we can do here. But she currently sits with the unsolved homicide team, just for clarity. So she doesn't sit with the missing persons unit. She's sitting with unsolved homicide. So that obviously goes in hand with them doing rewards and things like that, because they believe that someone has done something to her.
I think it's kind of unbelievable that when you were talking about you can only check either missing or found, and there's no in between. And they kind of take the police's assumption that, all these pieces, and make it look like, yeah, she's found. But that kind of overrules your assumption of, well, no, she's not. And sometimes in these cases, the positive thing that comes out of this is like laws changed or policies get fixed to help like reverse some of these, things that obviously are making the system not work. Do you know if anything has come from this in like a policy change, just even checking those boxes? Like, is that something that they can change or are looking to change, or anything similar to that because of some of these steps that you've gone through?
Yeah, it's a good question. So after we launched the podcast, about 3 months later, the New South Wales Missing Persons Unit was disbanded. And I have been told by the head of the Missing Persons Unit in Sydney that that was the rejigging of that and working out better processes and working with things better stemmed a lot from what I was talking about publicly in my own mum's case, and exposing what I had been through back in the 90s and early 2000s, and the problems and the mistakes that were made and the assumptions and things like that. So it did have a change. They have brought about a new missing persons unit in Sydney, and I had the head of the New South Wales Missing Person Unit come and sit in my house actually and pick up some ballet slippers of mum's to take away for testing for DNA, and having coffee with me. And we were talking about it, and I said, this is really important. Because I don't want any other families. And this is why I get up and do these podcasts, not to sort of talk about my mum's case all the time, but to bring awareness to, your words matter, and people should not make assumptions, and people need to clarify their actions by proof and fact, not just them making a judgment call on somebody that they've never met, particularly the police. And, I think we have made headway with that. I see now in my community, and with, my mum's community is massive now, whereas for years and years and years I would struggle. If you look at my Facebook page, I'm like struggling with 1,000 followers going, I just don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to turn to. Mum's got 30,000 followers now, and we've done these massive podcasts with 25 million downloads. I've got people all over the world who know about my mum. We had a moment where we were going through the inquest where people were writing my mum's name in the sand, or if they weren't near the beach, they were writing Marion in rocks when they were walking their dogs, and people were posting this all over and I thought, you know what, for the first time in my life, people are actually talking about my mum, because in my family, on the other side of the fence, my mum's sisters and my grandparents, they would not let me talk about her. It was, a taboo subject. It was like, we don't want to talk about it. The police have said that they located her. We're satisfied with that. And I'm like, no, there's something wrong. And so I've had to fight my way through. My brother died. My mum and dad divorced when I was really little, so he really didn't have anything to do with mum. So I had no support network whatsoever, outside of my husband Chris and my kids. And I didn't want to have to put that pressure on them either, because I've got to protect that relationship and make sure that stays strong and doesn't fall apart while I'm maneuvering and going through all of this as well, which is extremely stressful. But hopefully telling it and talking about it makes a difference for the next family that have to go through this.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, and like going to what, that's why, like words matter. And like what Lisa was, the question that she had asked about, like in all aspects, words matter, right? Like whether, what you say, someone reporting something to the police, what they say, and then also what the police say, or what the police do. And I know there was a lot of there was some some police officers that had actually, they testified during the inquiry as well, or they were on and they were asked these types of questions, right, about their lack of investigation or the missteps there. And I know I think you had said in another podcast I listened to that they never even like gave an apology or anything, right, about the way in which, and also just the way that they would tell you things too, like the call that you got, just the way it was worded, no sort of sensitivity around that. Right.
And you know what? The sad thing about that is it hasn't changed. Like we have people that go, oh, we're learning from this and we're doing more. But I was talking to a lady literally on Friday, so that's 2 days ago, and her son is missing, and she was telling me that the police said to her, I don't know why you're bothering. There's pigs down there. They would have got to him. And then another police officer said when she was walking into a location, turns around and says something to the effect of, oh, well, you know what the smell is like, right? And I'm like, why would someone say that to you when your son is missing? Like, what is wrong with people? And these are police who are saying this. So I don't know who the police officer is. I don't even know what branch they're at, but I know that is disgraceful. And I was absolutely mortified to hear that she had to hear that from somebody who should be helping her find her boy. So, unfortunately, it still happens today. And that's why I keep banging on and hope that these people listen to our podcast and go, you know what, your words do matter. And what you say has a lasting effect. And, those words will stick in your brain forever. I remember even going back to what you were just asking, AJ, like the first thing that I have in my head when I think about poor word choices is when that guy's ringing me saying, hey, we've spoken to your mother. Essentially, she doesn't want anything to do with you. Where was the concern and the care for me as a human being to go, oh, look, we've found something, or we've spoken to her. I'm going to come up and see you and sit down in your house, and I'm actually going to just be very gentle and say to you, hey, listen, this is what's happened. We're really sorry. We're here if you want. We've got some services over on this side that can support you and talk to you and help you. No, you just get a phone call. And this has happened to me the whole way through. When they found Rick Blum for the first time, I'm getting a phone call as I'm driving up to Noosa with my kids in the car on speaker. I don't get like a, hey, is it a good time to call? It's just like, hey, so we found him and we've talked to him, and the guy from the ad in the paper, and my kids are listening in the car, and I'm like, well, and I don't want to hang up on them because it might be another month before I hear from them again. So you know what? It's like it's a trauma-induced coma that we end up being in, and I'm just really hopeful. I'm not trying to be critical of people. I'm trying to be, make an awareness and say, it's important. I appreciate everything that everyone does, and I understand a lot of situations, but the police, they do need to do better. It's as simple as that. And I know some of them do try very, very hard, but there are some that just don't seem to, in the missing space, the missing people are not really regarded as important. And, if there was someone stabbed on the street, that person would get 100% attention and their family would get counselling and they would get help. But when someone goes missing and there's no one over here, it's not a physical being that we're talking about in the sense of the word. It's just left. And I think it's probably, I don't know, maybe they think it's too difficult to try and find someone when they do go missing. But, to make comments about, their person being eaten by pigs and what that might smell like. I mean, what world are we living in when someone says that? And why are you in that position, actually, as a police officer to say something like that? I think it's horrendous. So, yeah. It does get better, but it's still happening, unfortunately. So we've still got a bit to go in this space in bringing awareness and helping people understand the consequences behind those words.
Yeah, and like just even from yes, you're a police officer, so you should be, but also just from a human level, like you should just be, as a human being, you should be a little bit more compassionate and careful with the way in which you say things, what you say, and how you deliver that kind of updates or news. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if Katie or Lisa, if you had anything like maybe questions just about the case itself that you wanted to clear up, or anything that we didn't get the chance to ask Sally at all.
I guess one thing that I was just asking, and I think I probably know the answer to this, but kind of looking back now after piecing all these things together, people say hindsight is 2020. Is there things like before she went missing, like maybe years or months before, where she would mention like, oh, I want to quit my job, sell my house, and I just want to leave? Or even like maybe like 5 years earlier, just be like, I kind of I want a career change. I want something new. Like, did any of that happen? And so when she did do this, it was kind of like, okay, this kind of is in line with what she has been talking about, or was it kind of right out of the blue?
It was very left of centre. So she had only just moved up to the Gold Coast. So we lived on the south coast of New South Wales, and she had a house down there. She'd separated from Ray Barter, so she had to buy a new house. So she had set up that house, and then my mum was very dedicated to her teaching and worked very hard on trying to do better and getting promotions and things like that. And there was an opportunity on the Gold Coast, which is in Queensland, so that's a different state. She applied for that job. It was at an all-boys school, and she was in charge of setting up and creating the prep class, which is for 4 and 5 year old boys. So it was a boys' school. And so she actually upped her life and moved to the Gold Coast in December of 1993, and was loving life. Like, she was doing super well. The prep program that she had created was doing so well, they created a second class, and both the classes were full. The school were extremely happy with her. She was nominated and won the Best Teacher in Queensland award in the November of 1996. And the only things that I can tell you that I do know is that she was having difficulty with some of the teaching staff at school after she won that award. I sort of put it down to like a bit of tall poppy syndrome, where they were, saying she wasn't deserving of the award and all that sort of jazz, and that, that the parents loved her too much, and that's why she won the award. And, as someone said to me, well, if the parents are saying that they're loving the teacher of their child, and their child's coming home going, they're my favorite teacher, that's probably like the pinnacle of what you want in a teacher, right? I've got people now who are adults who I connect with, and their families who my mum taught, and they still say my mum was their favourite teacher, and they have really close memories and loved her so much as a teacher. So everything seemed pretty normal, Katie. Like, it wasn't like she was, a loose cannon. As I said, like, she'd just done her new will, and she would come and have dinner with me once a week where I worked, because I worked at a department store, and I would work a night shift every second Thursday night. She'd come and have dinner with me. And life was pretty basic. Like, it was pretty boring. If anything, my brother just got engaged. I had just got engaged. She came and had our engagement party only 2 weeks before she left. And she was super excited for us, and everything was fine. And so when she said to me she was going to quit her job, I knew with the whole school side of things that there was, an undercurrent that she probably wasn't loving. And if you think, I don't know what private schools are like over where you guys are, but there can be a lot of, my mum wasn't the kind of teacher that was walking around with her string of pearls dressed up, in her suit attire, being that straight ridge teacher. She's walking around in flowy dresses and ballet flats and pretty florals and her hair out and just wispy and loving life really. And my mum was that person that would sit there and listen to Lionel Richie and Laura Bannigan and have it blasting and singing around the house on a Sunday morning. And she just loved life. Like, she was such a nice person. And every time she'd visit someone, she'd bring flowers or a cake, or she'd always remember your birthday. And that's why it was so weird for me when she didn't ring Owen. I just knew something then was not right. But I don't think there was much in it at all until around the March of 1997. And that's when she said she was going to sell the house. And when she sold it quickly in that 3-week period at a loss, there was something not right with that with me either. But I was like, she could have just kept the house. I would have happily tried to sell it for her. But yeah, there was that was probably that's a bit off. And then obviously seeing her at the petrol station and her driving off really quickly and weirdly with a guy in the car, that was a bit off as well. Telling Chris to get out of the house, that was off as well. But this was literally all within like 2 months before she went. So something was happening. She seemed stressed. She was crying to me at times about school and saying that she was unhappy there, and but had openly told me that she was, could potentially live overseas and teach overseas, and we were happy for her to do that. We were supportive of her to do that. So there's no reason for her to disappear herself from our lives and never see us ever again. And since then, my brother died. Both her parents have passed away. Lots of family have died because it's a long time ago, and my mum would be 81 this year in October. So, she'd be an old lady herself right now if she had that opportunity to do that. But I've had 3 kids. They've never met my mum. They've never met their grandmother. And that's probably the most heartbreaking thing for me, because I just know she would have been a really great grandma to them. And, there's a hole in us, in our hearts, when, every time we have Mother's Day or her birthday pops around or my birthday pops around, and even having babies and things like that, I didn't have my mum there to ask her when things were going wrong or something was happening. I didn't have anybody to ask, and that was really challenging for me as a person. But it's okay. Here we are. We're just doing the best we can, and hopefully we will find the answers soon enough.
Yeah, and hopefully with that, the $1 million reward, I mean, that really does maybe get people more engaged or more willing to come forward. And I know Rick Blum, I think it's Rick Blum pronounced, or Mick Bloom, maybe in Europe it's Bloom.
Yeah, we say Blum here, but it's Bloom over there, but it's Blum. One of his 53 aliases that he has. It's the current one.
Yeah, he and so he did testify during the inquiry as well, right? And he did admit eventually to knowing your mom or being with your mom, correct? Right? And for that short period of time before she had left. Like, I think he did change his story a couple of different times. So I don't, even following, like, I remember reading like the inquiry document, like even following his story was even hard because it changed, I feel, many times, but he did eventually admit to that, correct?
Yeah, so what happened was when he first, at the outset, when he was spoken to by police, they asked him if he knew my mum, and he said no, he didn't. And they were asking about a missing persons case. So I don't know what they said, but you can imagine it probably would have been, hey, there's a missing person, her name's Marion Barter. Did you know her, or do you know her? And he said no. And then he went home, and then he came back the next day and said, actually, I do know her. I had an affair with her. So we feel like that's a pretty big jump from I don't know her, but I actually had an affair with her. He told police, and this is what I've read, is that he said that because his wife was there and he didn't want her to know that he'd had an affair. And then he ended up being on the stand for 9 days. That's a long time. So just for clarity too, we have two different types of coronial processes here. We have an inquiry and we have an inquest. So an inquiry is when we don't have witnesses come into the court. It's all based on paperwork from the police, so what the police report is, and then they just read it to the coroner. The coroner does their investigation with the Crown solicitor team, and then they make a judgment call on that. But an inquest is actually the ones that go the longest, and where they have people come on the stand and actually give witness testimony. So I know overseas it's a bit different, but in Australia that's how it works here. And we ended up, I can't even remember now, I think it was probably 21 days of inquest. And I remember them saying to me, the Crown solicitors, like, this is an unprecedented amount of days. Like, this does not happen. And they'd spent $1 million on going through an inquiry to find out what's happened to my mum. And it was just so long-winded. And we ended up having like 4 other women who Rick Blum had relationships with come on the stand and tell about their stories. And I mean, I think you can still watch it on YouTube as well. You can go on, and if you Google New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry and do Marion Barter, it will come up, and you can actually go and watch it, and you can watch Rick Blum speaking on the stand. And it was very challenging. I had a mental breakdown at one point because they asked him flat out, did you murder Marion? And he said no. And my whole body, my nose just started running, and I reached forward and I asked the police barrister actually in front of me if I could have a tissue. And at that point, my whole body just started convulsing, and I had my head down in my lap, and I just could not stop shaking, and I was crying. And I'm a pretty strong person. I don't do that, but I think my body was to hear that question asked. And I feel like I was getting to the point where maybe we might find out what had happened. So it just was crushing it's such a weird feeling, isn't it? No one wants to hear that their person has been murdered or, whatever, but it's just, I don't know, it's just a position to be in. But he said he doesn't know anything about what happened to my mum. He claims he didn't fly overseas with her. The timeline that we have is that he left the country 5 days before her, but he was using a different name. So he was using a passport in the name of Richard Lloyd Westbury. And my mum, if we think about this, she went in and she changed her name to Florabella Natalia Marion Ramakel. Fernand Ramakel's middle names are Nokolis Marie. So the initials are identical to the name that Rick Blum had got a driver's license in Queensland in that name, but he had stolen Fernand Ramakel. The real Fernand over in Luxembourg, he'd stolen his identity to get that license in Australia. And then on the stand, Rick Blum actually accused my mum of stealing the driver's license out of his wallet and to help her be able to change her name. So that doesn't really make any sense to me, but he made that claim. And he said that they only caught up 3 times, and that they, he didn't speak very well of my mum actually, but said they only caught up 3 times in that whole period of time. But we jumped from only seeing her 3 times to him admitting to having her tea chest with all of her things, that her treasures packed up, and her artwork and all her things that are still missing today. He said that he was storing them for her in his garage where his wife and children were living down in northern New South Wales. So these are wooden tea chests as well. So you can't just pick them up. You've got to put them on what do you call it? I can't think. I can't think what I want to say. You need to pick them up with machinery. You can't pick them up with your hands, right? And anyway, he admitted to having them at her house, and then made some story up about her coming to his house with a pilot. And this guy was in uniform and picking up the tea chests and taking them, and he never saw her again. But then he flies out on a different passport on a different day. And my opinion is that he wouldn't have flown with mum if he was using a different passport. He didn't have a passport in the name Ramakel, and my mum's just changed her name to be the same name as potentially, well, we know he had that name, so she's changed her name to be like his. So in my mind, it was like, well, you'd be foolish to travel together then, because she'd be able to see that you weren't actually who you said you were. And then he flew back in 2 days before my mum did into Brisbane Airport, and then Mum flies in. And Mum says on her incoming passenger card that she's coming back for 8 days, that she lives in Luxembourg, and that she's coming back to visit family, but only for that 8 days. And she's staying at a hotel in Brisbane called the Novotel. So what we now have is, and this is something that's new that's come out since the $1 million award, we now know, so that was on the 2nd of August, just for the timeline. So then on the 9th of August, we found something. I can't say what it is, but it actually is in my mum's handwriting, and it timestamps her in a place called Yamba on the New South Wales North Coast. It's about an hour's drive from, let's just say from Ballina, or it's in that neck of the woods. Okay, so Byron, Ballina, Yamba, it's all in the same little pocket. So on the Saturday, she's in Yamba in her own handwriting. So that was really important find, because we didn't actually have anything outside of the passenger card that was her handwriting. But on the passenger card, there's other handwriting on it where it looks like she has forgotten to write her occupation, for example, and someone has written home duties in there, which is not my mum's handwriting. But we think that potentially was customs as she's coming in, and they've gone, oh, you haven't filled in the form properly, and they've written like the flight number and things like that, which is not mum's hand. Anyway, that's on the Saturday. And then on the Monday, we know that Rick Blum went and purchased a car, and it was from a car dealer in his local area, and the car was apparently quoted to be a rust bucket. And we found the car dealer. The police had made a note of this car dealer in my mum's file, but I crossed it out and said that the number was disconnected and no further action required. But Joni, using her super skills, was able to find him very simply via Facebook. And we reached out to him, and she actually recorded a conversation with him with his okay to record the call. And glad she did, because he has sadly passed away since that happened. But he recalled the day that Rick Blum came in and purchased the car, and he said, it was the most unusual thing I've ever experience. You've got this big, tall Belgium guy talking with this accent, seemed very charismatic, and talking about coins and how worldly he is. And he told him that he only needed the car for a week because he was moving permanently to France. But he also told Joni that in the car across the road that he had driven in, there was a woman sitting in there with dark hair that looked European, and that's what he recalls. So he buys the car. And he couldn't understand why this guy was buying a rust bucket car, that, what would you use this for scenario. Anyway, the next day, my mum's Medicare card is used in Grafton. So actually, that's not the next day. On the Wednesday, on the 13th, her Medicare card got used at an optometrist in Grafton. And then 2 days after that, her money starts coming out of her bank account in Byron Bay. So this is in the August, and that's when that correlates with what the lady on the phone told me about the $5,000 coming out of her bank account. And then there's a gap. We've actually got now on file that her last transaction on one of her accounts was on the 1st of September, 1997. And then we've also got that next timestamp, which is the 15th of October, 1997. And just for clarity, the reason that the coroner has said that that's when my mum died is there is no digital footprint of my mum ever after that. So she hasn't left the country. Her passport's never been, her passport expired. She never left the country. She's never used her Medicare card. She didn't access her super. She doesn't get a pension. She hasn't changed her name again. And there's a lot of people that go, maybe she's just changed her name and living under a different name. I'm like, you need to think about this, because she went to the effort of changing her name via the Supreme Court in Brisbane. There is a firm record of that. She is not that kind of person that would go and change her name and just live under a different name. She would have gone and done it properly. And for me, it's like little cookie crumbs that she's leaving for us, a bit like Hansel and Gretel, where we can go back and look at these things and try and find the answers as to where she is and what's happened to her as this 29-year journey continues. But we have had, as I said, other people come forward, and there's some very very, very good and very interesting information that I think could turn it on its head at this point. So I'm really hopeful that what I've been told and what has been discussed will actually open the door right up in this case, which would be amazing after all this time. But I'm very hopeful still.
Yeah. And I know, and you actually had mentioned a couple of questions that I was going to ask, because I was going to ask about the Medicare card. So but one question I did have as well is there was, I think it was like the bank security had confirmed that it was Marion that came into the bank and withdrew that amount of money. Correct? Like they did. And I think there was a little bit in the inquiry, was there a little, or the inquest, was there like a little bit of a confusion of whether it was her or when it was, and the bank teller's account?
Yeah. So what happened was, at the inquest we had the okay, I probably have to wind back a little bit to make this make sense. But after I got the phone call from the police and they said that they'd located Mum, I told my grandfather, and my grandfather was dying of bone cancer at this time. And he said he was the only one that was really thinking with me, going, something's not right. Like, she would not do this. This is out of character for her. He has said all of those things. So he then was listening to the radio, and the Salvation Army here used to do a segment on the radio about missing persons. So he contacted them. And so he was working with the missing persons unit through the Salvation Army. And they in turn were working with and getting information from missing persons in Queensland. So that's the Queensland, that bit that you're talking about, that came up at the inquest, and it was the Queensland Missing Persons Unit who had said this. So after I get the phone call saying they've located her, my grandfather goes to the Salvation Army. They're working in turn with missing persons in Queensland, and they are the ones that actually came on the stand. And that was a horrendous moment for me, because that woman sat on the stand, and one of the first things she said, they were talking about how quick they did the investigation, and she said, yeah, we like to clean them up quick. And I just sat back and I thought, oh my goodness, like, my mum's still missing right now, and you're telling me how proud you are that you cleaned it up quick. And that person actually, or that lady and her team, were the ones that marked my mum located again. So we had two different points of her being located, and that sat with the narrative for the rest of my mum's case. So everybody who touched my mum's case said, oh, well, she's been located twice, actually, from New South Wales and Queensland, but no one saw her. So she was asked as well, did you ever sight or speak to Marion? No, I did not. And what she said was that it was a bank teller who confirmed to her that it was definitely my mum, and it's written on the letter from the Salvation Army to my grandfather. The bank security are like the police. So if they say it must be true, and confirmed that the bank teller said that Marion, it was your daughter Marion, is what they've written, your daughter Marion, who came in and confirmed about, withdrew all the balance of her account and spoke of starting a new life. End of story. However, we know for a fact, because we've got the documents, that she didn't close her account. There was still money sitting in her bank account. And that money sat there for the next 29 years, and the bank was taking their monthly account keeping fee on her bank account for 29 years. And so they did reinstate that. Like, I must say that the guy who was helping us, he was excellent. And he said, I'm going to reverse all those charges. But, and this comes with the problem, right? When people, someone's missing and everyone's just making assumptions that they've chosen to leave. There's no action. They quash the whole thing. And by saying all these things and making assumptions, like the question was put to this officer, she's retired now, but, well, you never spoke to Marion or cited her. How can you mark her as located? And she was like, oh, well, and her boss was asked the same question, like, how could you have let your staff do that? And she said, oh, well, she's a really good detective. She was one of my best. And I was like, you're not getting the picture here, guys. Like, how can you be the best if you've got a missing person and you're making an assumption that because you spoke to a bank teller and you didn't write down the name of the bank teller, you didn't write down what branch she worked at, what date that phone call took place or that conversation took place, her name. We've got nothing. So we couldn't even pull her as a witness and go, hey, do you remember seeing this person? Was it definitely Marion who came in? Like, how are you so sure that it was her who came in and did this? So yeah, there's a lot in it, and hopefully, as I said before, people learn from it and they don't make the same mistake.
Yeah. Wow. It's just, yeah, there's so much to this, and so many missed opportunities, of course, for the police. And it's just, yeah, as we get to nearly 30 years. So it's just wild. I don't know if Lisa or Katie have anything from those last few points, any questions about that or anything else you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I did. Like, one of the biggest questions, like you had mentioned, just like how could she have been so sure it was her? But I guess, I mean, that was just one of the biggest things I was stuck on was that. Yeah, but I guess we'll never really know, I guess.
Yeah, and if that's the best, one of the best detectives that they have, and they're doing stuff like that, it makes me worried for the rest of the department.
Mm. Well, she's
I guess
retired now, so hopefully the next people learn from it and do better. Hopefully.
Yeah. I guess one of the biggest questions, and like, feel free to not answer if you don't want to like speculate and things like that. But what, in your opinion, is the answer? Like, what happened to your mom?
It's hard for me to say because no one's been charged. My mum was, I don't know, she was pretty savvy as well, you know, with the way she handled life and conversations, and she'd been through a fair bit. Like, she'd been through 3 marriages and had to deal with quite a bit through those marriages. And people make assumptions about her being married and divorced, but I know exactly why those marriages failed. And you know, there should be huge empathy to her, actually, as the woman in all 3 of those situations. I won't go into it, but you know, I know what happened, and I was living through 2 of them, and she spoke to me a lot about the first one. And you know, I've learned a lot about my mum as a human being too, and I feel like she was very easily coerced, very easily manipulated, very easily, you know, like, I look back to Ray Barter. He left his wife and said to my mum after only a few dates, hey, I'm going to leave my wife. I've got nowhere to go. And she let him come and live in our house. So, you know, and he's an interesting human. I won't go into it, but, you know, I have a fair bit of trauma from my childhood. No thanks to him. And, you know, my brother, he's the reason really that mum sent Owen to go and live with my dad, because he didn't get along with Owen. And my brother was, you know, 2 points off being a genius. And I just don't think he coped very well with Owen being able to, you know, have a decent conversation or be able to go and just do basic things like start the lawnmower when he couldn't get it to work and things like that. And it really riled him. I remember those sorts of things happening when I was a kid. So my mum has, you know, she has a lot of that, and I want to sort of get to say that because I don't say it very often for her with regards to her relationships. I think my mum, knowing that she said to us that she was going on the Orient Express, I think that's a really key part of this story and the whole Luxembourg connection. We have spoken to Luxembourg police multiple times, and they did help me when I was in Luxembourg with Channel 7, but I know that they have also spoken to New South Wales Police. And when you live in Luxembourg, you actually have to register as a resident. And so they actually looked up both names, so Flora Bella Ramakel and Marion Barter, and her date of birth, and she's never ever been registered as living in Luxembourg. So we don't think that she ever lived in Luxembourg. I think that was part of the fairy tale that was suggested. And I also think the carrot dangle, I call it, was the Orient Express. Let's go on the Orient Express. And I don't think she sadly ever got there. She said to me she was postponing her trip on the Orient Express, and whereas in her postcard to her aunties, like before she rang me, she was like, oh, next stop Amsterdam to see the sunflowers at, Vincent van Gogh's museum and go on the Orient Express. She was super excited by that. And then something happened and she's come back to Australia. I personally think that because she had changed her name on her passport and she had her international driver's license in the name of Ramakel, so they were both her forms of ID that were legally done, but they were now Ramakel, but her bank account was still in the name of Marion Barter. I believe that she's had to come back to get her money because she wasn't able to actually access the money. And there was a conversation, and this is interesting too. Rick Blum just openly told the court that my mum had told him that she wanted to buy a school in the UK, right? I didn't know you could buy a school in the UK. I was like, how do you buy a school? But anyway, thinking about Montessori and Steiner variety schools where, I don't know if you know what they are, but they're, do you know what a Steiner school is and the Montessori? The kids come, they don't wear a uniform, they call the teachers by their first name. It's a little alternative, so the kids have, if they're talking about water, they go and splash in the water, and it's a lot of sensory kind of learning. And my mum loved that style of teaching, so I don't know if she was thinking she could buy a Steiner school or she could buy a school. Anyway, lo and behold, I'm doing the podcast and I have a lady contact me and she said, oh, Sally, my mum and your mum were really good friends. We met when we were young. I came to your house and we had afternoon tea. And my mum's actually got a postcard from your mum and she'd like you to have it. She feels like I've been listening to The Lady Vanishes and I told mum and she said, oh, she'd like you to have it. And I said, oh, look, just send me a photo of it. So I've got the details, but she can keep it. Like that's precious for her. And she said, no, she really wants to gift it to you. So she sends me the postcard and I'll tell you in a minute about a clever thing to do with postcards and things like this in this situation. Remind me because I'll forget. There's little dots on the postcard, which I'll talk about. But in that postcard, when I got it, I was reading it and my mum writes to her, and this lady was also a teacher, just for clarity. And she said to her, did you know that you can buy a school over here? You only need X amount of pounds. So she's done like £60,000 to, I don't know, I can't remember now, £120,000. And I'm like, right. So that's the same sort of money that we're talking about that was withdrawn out of her bank account. We know mum never left Australia again, right? And people can say, oh, well, she probably got a different passport. I don't buy that. I just don't buy that because mum was a stickler for the rules. She was a goody two-shoes, if you like. She would never have done anything that she wasn't allowed to do. So I definitely think she's come back to Australia because she's had the roadblock over there of trying to access the money. And maybe they found a school. She was down in Rye, which is like this gorgeous little hamlet in the UK. And there were schools available. So we've gone into these deep dives. And she also, the connection to Rye is she had Barclays Bank in Rye is where she had set up her address for while she was overseas. And so that's where we drew us to Rye. And we do all of these deep dives in the Missing Matter podcast. So we actually do a whole episode about Rye. And just to give you guys and your listeners a bit more information, you can go and find out more there. But these are connectors that are really interesting to us. And we know that Rick Blum and his wife Diane, when they lived in the UK, they lived in a suburb called Burwash. And Burwash is a short drive from Rye and from Tunbridge Wells. So my mum was basing herself in Tunbridge Wells. And I remember the coroner looking at me when we were the first day on the stand. His wife was on the stand, Diane, and she asked Diane where they lived when they lived in the UK, and she said Burwash, and she said what was the closest like bigger town to Burwash, and she said Tunbridge Wells, and the coroner looked straight down to the back of the court to me with her eyes like, are you kidding? Like, that's where your mum was. Like, why are there all these little connectors, and why is it in these locations? So I honestly think that maybe the dream was that it was suggested that mum could buy a school in the UK, but then there was the roadblock and we've got to go back and get your money. And then something's happened from there. I can't tell you what. I don't know. I've got I've got my own assumptions, but as I've been saying all the way along, we don't assume because, as my mum would say, it makes an ass out of you and me. So, we're just hoping that we can find a key piece of information, or someone, as we said earlier, people they only know what they don't know what they don't know, and we are getting more people every day saying, oh my God, I was just listening to the podcast and I know someone or something, and I don't know if it means anything, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And I'm like, this is excellent. That's exactly what we need people to do. And the smallest piece of information can put together the puzzle that we're sort of pushing through and trying to put together. So I don't know the answer, Katie. I don't know exactly what's happened. But I'm hoping we can find the answer before too long, because it is exhausting and stressful, and I'm on heart medication these days. And, you can probably hear from me jumping around and forgetting things as I'm talking. My brain is so full. I've got so much information. And I find myself in this space now. I've just started a new initiative here. If I can tell you guys about that, because we'd love Canada to get on board with it as well. It's called the Green Seat Project. So after the inquest, and I just was left, as I said, like I felt like I was on an island and I had nowhere to go, and I had no body and I had no death certificate, but I'm trying to fill in a report to access and get a death certificate. And the questions on there were horrendous. They were like, where's the body? Who's the funeral director? What date did they die? How did they die? And I'm like, these are not questions that are for a missing persons case. So I've currently just put in a recommendation through the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry that is currently happening here, that maybe they need to address having a death certificate application for missing people, because it's very traumatizing to actually have to go through that process. But I realized at that point I had nowhere to go. My kids have nowhere to go to remember someone they've never even met, but has had a huge impact on their life. So I came up with the idea of having a seat. Green is my mum's favorite color. And we started a website when we were doing the podcast, which is, again, called The Missing Matter. And I thought, potentially we could help other families, because I had so many people coming to me going, oh, your podcast is so big and everyone knows your story now. No one knows about my dad. And, even when I got the $1 million award, I had people commenting on my page going, well, my brother's only got $100,000 award. Why is your mum worth $1 million and my brother's worth 100,000? And there's so much trauma that comes behind those sorts of things. So I wanted to try and do something to help everybody and use the space that I've built and this profile that I've got now in this space to help bring awareness to other missing persons cases. So the plan is we are working with councils and mayors around Australia and across the world. So we've already got one in Scotland, and we've got one going in Tunbridge Wells, we talked about before. So that's literally happening right this second. And across Australia, I think we've got about 16 at the moment, where green seats are going into locations where you look out to a beautiful location, somewhere that you can sit and reflect and think about missing people. Families can go and remember their loved ones there, but communities can also bring awareness to them about people who are missing within their space. Maybe they might know something. On the seat, we have a plaque that says The Missing Matter, and there's a QR code. And if someone scans that, it takes them to our website, and there they can actually view all the profiles of families that we're working with one-on-one to build, a meaningful profile, that a photo that they get to choose of their loved one, and, a little blurb that they write themselves in their own narrative about why their missing person matters. So we're sort of going above and beyond what the AFP and the police have, where they just say this person's name, their date of birth, their height, their eye colour. It's more than that. These people are more than that, and they're worth more than that. So we've built the website. They're in tabs now because we've got so many of them on there, but you can tab onto New South Wales and all of the profiles are there. We do have links there as well, which take them to the official websites for the AFP and the police that are looking after those cases, and obviously phone numbers and Lifeline and Beyond Blue links to help people if they do need some support while they're, processing things. But we're hoping it will just bring awareness to the missing in our communities, and to help remind people that they're still missing and they do matter. And it's such a wonderful initiative here. Everyone's so grateful that we're doing it, and the families are coming forward saying, I'd really love for you to put my missing loved one's profile on the website. That would be really great, and we'd love a green seat close to us so that we can go and sit there to remember them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm very busy, but I love doing that stuff because it just gives me a purpose in this space. Like there's not a lot else that you can sort of grapple with when you're in it. And if I can help somebody else and have a chat with people and just support them and know that they're not alone, that can make a difference. So yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
Awesome. I'll put a link to in the show notes for this episode. I'll put a link to the website, and I'll also link to your podcast, The Missing Matter, as well. So people,
I think it's a great idea. I love the green seat.
Yeah.
Really it's just something like no one's doing anything in this space. Like we don't have any support. We don't have any. Let's not say support. I'm talking from an authority point of view. But we don't have any funding. Like there's nothing for missing persons. There's if there are things for people who are living in domestic violence situations and things like that, but there's nothing for missing persons. And even with the domestic violence side of things, there's a lot of cases in missing persons cases that are linked to DV, and that's how that person is missing due to a DV situation. So, and that's men and women alike. It's not just for females. So I just wanted to do something that's a broad spectrum that can be quite a simple thing to do. It's not as easy to get council to approve a green seat, but and it's taking a little bit of time, which each council and everyone has a different requirement. But we're hoping that we will see these start to pop up around the place, and people will recognise them. They're a really beautiful, like bright green color, so they stand out a little bit, and the plaques are on there. And I've got 22 amazing humans who are working with me as volunteers in this space. And anyone who's listening to your podcast, if they would like their missing loved one to have their profile on our website, please let them know. It's just www.themissingmatter.com. So anyone is free to reach out all across the world. So very happy to help everyone because they all matter.
That's amazing. We will definitely get the word out for sure. I love that idea.
Yeah. And I guess the last question before we wrapped up was, what is the little trick with the postcards that you were going to mention before?
Oh, yes. I told you I'd forget. So when I should have got one out to show you. So when you have a letter, it goes through and this is going all the way back to 97, so it still happens today, but you'll see these, where the stamps are, there's these little orange or purple lines. It's like a digitized, like a stamp, if you like. It looks like that. What they are is they're actually readers, and when you give them to the right people, they can actually scan those as a code, and it will tell you where that letter was posted and what date, and whether it was in the morning or in the afternoon. So all of Mum's letters and postcards, we were actually able to timestamp them because there were weird dates of when they arrived back in Australia, but we've been able to establish that she was out in the middle of nowhere in oust houses where there wasn't a post office. So she probably put it in a post box, and it's taken a few days to get through to the sorting room and then getting out. And we know where those have left. It also was able to identify where she was in London, and there was a coin show in the same neighbourhood as where she posted that postcard from on that weekend and that date and stamp time. So if anyone's ever curious and they want to look into mail and things like that and see where it's come from, you can actually dig into those sorts of bits of information. It's just stuff I've learnt along the way with lots of great people, coming up with these ideas and helping and researching as to what we can do. So I definitely have not done any of this on my own. There's a massive team of people who have been awesome, and people I've never met before, right? I've only met them through the power of the podcast, and I always say it's power of the people that gets us here. And thanks to you guys too for doing what you're doing. It's a lot of work. I know from doing my own podcast now, it's a lot of work to put these together and get them out there, but it's a good story for people to hear about and learn from. And I hope that I hope we don't have anyone missing. That would be my goal. I'd like everybody to be able to communicate in a safe space to say, you know, I something's happened or I'm doing this, but I am okay. But you know, that's a pretty big goal. But we'll run with that for a little while and see if we can make a difference with this space for everyone who finds themselves in it.
Yeah. Awesome. Yes, I think that's it for our questions that we had. I know we kept you for a while here, but it was a great conversation. We really liked how open you are and how gracious you were to come on our show. We really do appreciate that. And like I said, we're going to put the link to your website so that people can go on and they can listen to the full podcast of either the Lady Vanishes or the Missing Matter and get even more information from there as well. So
Thank you. And you know what? You did a great job. When I first heard it, like your podcast came up, and I was like, oh wow, these guys have done a great job. It's such a big story to talk about, and that's why I reached out and I thought maybe there's a good conversation here because it can be a bit confusing if with all the detail and all the information. So I'm always happy to jump on and have a chat and tell everybody, you know, from my perspective anyway, what I can share and what I can explain, hopefully a little bit better. But thank you for taking the time and effort to look into Mum's story and help share it, because I always say someone knows something, and it's just a matter of finding those people and hoping that they come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you again. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe for more true crime content.